Hey gamers, Chris here. So what does it mean for a DM to fudge a die roll? Well, it means one of two things. Either one, they claim to receive a result on a die roll that they didn't actually achieve. Or number two, they change the DC of a roll after the roll was made, thus changing the results. Now there's been a huge debate whether DMs should fudge die rolls or not. And I try to keep an open mind, and I've looked at all the reasons and I've watched videos, long videos, telling me about how people played games in the 1800s. Like that really is relevant. Here's what's relevant. The main two reasons why people fudge die rolls seem to be number one, because they think it's going to enhance the story, and number two, because they think it makes things more fun for players. And both those are noble goals. But I do think in both cases, you got it backwards. There's always a way to enhance a story better than fudging a die roll, and there's always a way to make the game more fun than fudging a die roll. So that's our topic today, why I never fudge a die roll as a DM and why I gave up using a DM screen years ago. So, welcome to Tree and Monk's Temple. So first thing I should mention is that there is a difference between a DM fudging a die roll and a DM being just a little bit sneaky. These are two entirely different things. I don't fudge die rolls, but I'm occasionally a little sneaky. So you'll hear people who are defending the fudging of die rolls that sometimes they just roll a die just to keep the players off balance, because do you really want the players to know that once in a while you're actually rolling a die to see if a trap goes off or if an ambush is successful? No, you don't. So occasionally roll a die keeps the players on edge. No reason not to do that. You're not faking the results of your die. I can roll a die and I don't have to do it behind a screen. I can do it right in front of the players. They see a d20 roll and it rolls an 11. And I look at it and go, Now they have to figure out what 11 means. But the main thing is that they don't know, and that's a little bit tricky, but we're not lying about the results of the roll. They still see the roll. It was an 11, and if it meant something, then when that result occurs, they know why that result occurred. So what do DMs mean when they say that fudging their die rolls enhances the story? This is from an actual post from a DM who had been fudging some die rolls, and they were starting to wonder if it was the right thing to do, and then they had this situation coming up, and they were wondering whether they should be fudging their die roll for it. And they said, the PCs are 3rd level, and they're dealing with a very important NPC. If they fail this one diplomacy check, the entire game world would fall apart. So, this is one of those cases where the DM's saying, in order for the story to progress the way I want it to, a certain result needs to be achieved on a die roll. So that's one reason why DMs do it, is because they figure that there's going to be a die roll, and if the die roll goes the wrong way, then the story doesn't progress in the way they want it to. Or maybe it's a case where there's a certain plot point, and in order for that plot point to move to the next level, the characters needed to succeed at a certain check. So that, again, is something where you might fudge a die roll. But then let's talk about just the having fun, because this is the one that's brought up the most often, is I fudge die rolls because this is all about fun, and I want the players to have more fun, and I want me to have more fun. And when there's specific examples involved as to how fudging a die roll makes things more fun, it all breaks down to a few things that come up over and over again. The first is encounters. So a lot of campaigns have random encounters and you have to roll. So you roll to determine if there is a random encounter, and if there is, what it is. That's why it's called a random encounter. But sometimes you roll it and it's just not interesting, right? Maybe whatever's going to be attacking the players is not very powerful. And so you wonder, what's the point of that? I don't really want to have a few goblins attacking the 5th level party. That's kind of a boring encounter. Or maybe it's just uninteresting. Maybe this is an encounter that they've rolled before and now they're going to have it again. Oh, that doesn't sound interesting at all. Or maybe you roll it and it looks too tough. And you're like, if I do that encounter, PCs might die on a random encounter, and I don't want that to happen. So that's a reason why people think it would be more fun if I just fake a die roll, and then I pick the encounter I want to happen. The second is also for a random roll, random treasure roll, because of course, when you do random encounters, then there's random treasure. Certain monsters will have certain treasure, and then you roll on the tables. And sometimes you roll on the table and the magic item's too powerful. And then you think, if I give the PCs this, the challenges aren't going to be very interesting anymore, or one player is going to be significantly more powerful than the other players, and I don't want them to have an item of that level of power. The second thing is sometimes you roll an item and it's just not interesting. You don't think it fits any of the players and it doesn't add anything. So you decide, I'm just going to pick something a little more interesting. So you roll, you don't like the result, and then you pretend that you rolled something else. Oh, I rolled, it's actually a sword, a flaming sword, even though you had actually rolled a wand of magic missiles. The third one is to make encounters interesting. Sometimes the players, turns out the characters just leveled up and you didn't take into account how much level 4 to level 5 meant in power, and maybe they're rolling well, and maybe they're using good tactics. One way or the other, the encounters, encounter after encounter, just doesn't seem very challenging. So suddenly you think, maybe this guy rolls a critical on a player, and now that creates a little bit of danger, and that's a little bit more fun. So that's another reason why people sometimes fake their die rolls. And the reverse of that happens even more. This one I see all the time. That's where the players get unlucky in an encounter. So they go into an encounter, maybe they're foolhardy, maybe they split the party. Splitting the party, of course, comes up all the time. And then one or two players end up in an encounter that was supposed to include the entire party, and things quickly turn against them. They're getting unlucky, they can't get away, and now suddenly you're in a position where you might be wiping out these PCs. And now the other PCs are short-handed too, so suddenly they're in danger too. How do I save them? Well, suddenly the enemies start to miss. Whoops, they missed. Whoops, he missed. Or, how many hit points do you have left? I have 10 hit points left. Oh, he did 9 hit points damage. Whew! Lucky for you. And the idea there is that because the PCs survive, but it's close, then it still feels like a challenge, but you're not in a position where you actually have a chance of killing them. So you're fudging the die rolls to make it seem like there was real danger, but you make sure that the players don't actually die, because the players don't want their characters to die. And isn't that more fun for them, right? And finally, there's the one where, as a DM, you just made an encounter too difficult. I find this happens most often when DMs are converting from different systems, and especially never convert on the fly. Converting on the fly always ends in disaster. But even those who don't convert on the fly, if you don't carefully look at the challenge ratings, you can end up in a situation where the balance is way off, because different systems, different editions even, are balanced way different. What a beholder could do in 3rd edition and what a beholder can do in 5th edition are two entirely different things, and two entirely different parties can take them on. And it will become apparent very quickly because things turn against the players very fast. So, as a DM, what do? Well, I'm going to fudge some die rolls. Suddenly the enemy starts to miss, they start to do less damage, that kind of thing, and then the PCs can live, and then you can move to the next encounter. So that kind of breaks down the reasons why I've heard of DMs fudging rolls. I don't think any of them are legitimate. Every single one of them has a better solution than the faking of the die roll. The faking of the die roll, it's lazy, and it's not creative, and it doesn't have the result you think it does. So what happens if you fudge your die rolls? Well, if you're playing a one-time session with people, they'll probably never know, and they might have a good time, and no harm done. Fine. But when you start playing with people for years and years, we are creatures of pattern. And this is what happens. As soon as you fudge a die roll and you get away with it and everyone had fun, it's just like anything else in life, is that human beings are creatures of pattern. We recognize patterns. So you recognize that last time I fudged a die roll, everyone had fun and it saved the day. So I'm going to do it again. And I'm going to do it again. And I'm going to do it again. But here's the problem. Human beings are trained to recognize patterns. Your players start to recognize, hey, whenever we're in a tough situation, the enemies start rolling bad. Whenever the DM asks how many hit points I have left, the creature always seems to do a little bit less. Or whenever it seems like the DM is looking for a certain result, it always happens. It's one thing to be in a combat where it feels like things are going against you, and then by luck you succeed. But when that starts to happen again and again with the same DM and the other result never seems to happen, you know now, okay, this guy is faking his die rolls. Every time that DM rolls, especially if they're rolling in secret, and they always do, somebody who fudges their die rolls always rolls in secret. As soon as they start rolling well, particularly if it works against you, you start being suspicious. Did they really roll well, or are they just trying to screw us over? And then whenever they roll poorly, you start to wonder, did they really roll poorly, or are they just trying to save us? Once the lie is detected, all rolls become suspect. And then soon as your character is in a situation where it looked like he might die, and then by good fortune, because the DM started to roll bad, you lived, all that feeling of risk that you had before is gone. Suddenly, making poor decisions no longer seems to be of any consequence. We can be foolhardy. We can ignore the danger because what's the point? And why are we even engaged in these combats where we're rolling dice if those results didn't really matter? If everything's predetermined, why don't you just tell us what it is? Because we're all kind of wasting our time here. And what happens is the engagement in the campaign diminishes. So why don't I roll in secret at all? Well, I kind of figure if you're a DM who doesn't fudge your die rolls, then why roll in secret? It makes no sense, right? There's certain rolls that you need to make in secret, and you can just use your hand to roll behind your hand, but there's no reason why an attack roll on a player should be kept secret unless you're keeping the option open to fudge. That's the only reason you do it. So I kind of get this feeling that all DMs who use screens fudge rolls. So there you go. If you're a player and your DM is hiding their rolls behind a screen, they're probably faking rolls. In fact, in general, playing without a screen is far more dramatic, far more exciting. When you are a DM and you roll in front of the players and you roll that critical hit, they all see it. You don't even need to announce it's a critical hit. You roll, they all see the 20, and all the faces drop. Critical hit, right? Or if a player's in trouble, and then you attack them and you roll a low number, everyone cheers because they all see the number. They don't need you to tell them and then have to trust you. It's right there. It's far more exciting, and that risk is there. The second thing is with skill checks. I've gotten in the habit now. If I ask somebody for a roll, I always tell them what the DC is. And then in certain cases, I'll also tell them what the results of success and failure will be. It really depends on the roll. I'll give some specific examples later. Because what happens is right now is a DM will say, well, roll a history check. So you roll a history check, I rolled a 7. Okay, and then they just tell you everything they would have told you if you had rolled a 22. So why did they have you roll the history check? What was the point of that? But the idea is they want to give you this information, but then they have you do the roll, and you rolled poorly, so we'll just alter the DC. The DC doesn't matter. Just roll the dice and I'll tell you the information. I figure a good role-playing experience has 4 main structures. I think of it like a stool, and there's 4 legs, and each leg represents one thing. The first leg represents a story. This is just having an interesting story that the players are engaged in. The second is role play. In other words, having players engaged in their characters, and that can be about players interacting with each other in character, or it could be interacting with NPCs, with the DM. One way or the other, this is where we're not rolling dice, we're just playing the game. The next is empowerment. This one's really important. Players need to feel like their characters make a difference. Like the story isn't just already written right to the end, but that they can make a real difference in the things they do. So not just in success or failure, but they can also change the story in other ways. They also need to feel like they're not completely bound by the rules. There should be occasions where they can do things or try things that maybe aren't covered under the rules, and you as a DM will facilitate that. And finally, there needs to be risk. The idea that they can fail. The idea that something bad could happen if the die doesn't fall the right way. These 4 things, I think, all work together to make a great role-playing experience. Now, if you take one of them away, suddenly your stool is off balance. Those other 3 things better be brilliant, or your campaign is going to die. It's going to topple. No one wants to sit down and just be told a story and occasionally roll dice. I can roll dice in front of my TV and be told a story. I want to be involved. I want there to be a chance of failure. I want there to be role playing. I want there to be interaction. I want to feel like I'm in control of the story. I want to feel like my actions make a difference in this story, and I want the story to be good. All those things. Don't take any of them away from me. So I talked about reasons why DMs fudge die rolls at the beginning, and I said there was a better way to deal with all those things. So let's go through them one at a time, and I'll explain a different way they could be handled. So first, if as a DM you need a result to be a certain result, don't have a die roll. In that example where it was one die roll or your campaign is over, I don't think avoiding that die roll is the solution. I think designing that entire encounter differently is the solution. Whenever you're going to ask for a die roll from a player where they have a chance of success or failure, I think the best way to handle it is you determine a good result and a bad result, and they both have to be acceptable results. If there's a good result, maybe everything moves ahead smoothly. If there's a bad result, maybe it creates a roadblock, and now the players need to find a way to fix it. That's the way to do a die roll. You didn't make your history roll? Well, then you don't know this important information. How are you going to find it out? As a DM, you can give other routes. Again, players should be empowered. So they didn't know that information offhand. Is there a library nearby? Or a mage who might help them out? Or a sage? There's got to be other ways than rather just having them roll and pretending that whatever they rolled was enough. Then it feels like when they fail that roll, it's important, but it's not the end of your game. And that creates risk for players. It doesn't always have to be risk of death. Sometimes it's just risk of failure or risk of roadblocks. Those kinds of things are okay. So you create the good result, the bad result, and then players make the roll and one of those two things happen. And if they get the bad result, you deal with it. It's okay. So as a DM, I like to let them know what the DC is beforehand. You need to make a history check. DC is 15. They make their roll. They rolled a 14. You didn't get the information. You don't know. You think you might need to know. Now they have a new challenge. What you want are die rolls where you choose a good result and a bad result. So in the case of the example, you got an NPC and there's a diplomacy check that's very, very important. And if they fail, it's the end of the campaign. Well, then don't roll it. Don't do a diplomacy check. That's important. Why would you do a diplomacy check for that? This is a role-playing game. What would I do to deal with that instead? Well, how about have it so that the players understand the significance of this diplomacy? So maybe they're directed to find out some things about the person they're doing the diplomacy with. Maybe one of the PCs finds out that his character happened to grow up in the same village as that NPC. And maybe another PC learns that they had the same mentor at one point. And maybe another PC learns that when this NPC gets very mad, often laughing brings off the tension. And then have them go in and role play it. Get rid of the dice and have fun with it. Make it hard for them. And maybe throw in some roadblocks. Maybe the one PC brings up that, hey, we grew up in the same village, and then there's a bonding. But then the other player gets cocky and says, oh, and I think we had the same mentor. And then the NPC says, well, he said he would never have another student after me. And maybe that gets him angry and builds it up. So then maybe the third PC knows and laughs, and he laughs it off. This all can be role played. It can be fun. Just rolling a die and then pretending that you actually rolled the die, that's not fun. What's the point of that? If you don't want the results of a bad roll, don't roll. Role play. Though sometimes you end up with rolls where PCs can die. I actually am currently running a campaign, and in this campaign, in the very first session, the PCs were betrayed. And they were betrayed by their patron, and they hated him. And over the next few sessions, he kept getting in the way and getting in their plans and causing them problems. And so they wanted revenge so bad. And a couple levels later, they got their chance. They were able to set up a trap for him. However, he was kind of expecting a trap, so it ended up being a situation where he might get away. Now, this particular campaign takes place on a city that's actually hanging from the roof of a cavern. So it's a bunch of rope ladders with wooden planks. And this enemy was escaping, and one of the PCs looked, and he could potentially cut him off at the pass if he jumped from this one rope ladder to another rope ladder. It was like 20 feet down or something and off to the side a bit. And this is a place where The storms are always raging, and there's this ocean beneath them where there's massive swells of 30 feet, 40 feet. The players know if they land in there, it's over. So then this is the point where, as a DM, you can make a success or a fail where the failure means death. So I set an acrobatics roll. I said, if you make this acrobatics roll, and this is the DC, I don't remember what it was, we'll say it was 15. If you make the DC, you land on your feet. If you miss the roll by 5 or less, you don't land on your feet, but you manage to hang on before you fall. But if you miss the DC by more than 5, you're going to fall. And I'm not going to be rolling damage if your character falls, and we're not going to play it any further. You're going to fall into the ocean below, and you know that's it. So if you're going to roll this dice, just be aware you may have to make a new character. Player chose to roll the die, succeeded. They stopped the enemy, and they killed him. And they all celebrated. But that player might have failed, and he might have fallen, and he might have died. And you know what? If so, he makes a new character. And what does he know with the new character? When I do actions like that, there's a chance I will fail. There's a chance I will die. It creates excitement. That die roll was exciting because the players knew that I wasn't going to lie to them, and that the chance of failure was real. Now, what if they had just let him get away? Well, they could have. They could have let him get away. And he would have come back again, and they would have got another chance for revenge later. Eventually, they would have got him. A player chose to take this risk. They chose to put their character at risk so that they could get him now, and because they wanted that satisfaction. But if they hadn't got that, it would still be fun to have this enemy they hate so much continue coming back and harassing them, because when they finally get him, it's going to be super satisfying. So it's not like you can never have a die roll where a player could potentially die, but you should probably avoid die rolls where your campaign could be completely over. So what about the random encounter? Do we really want to run a random encounter that's boring? No, we don't want to run a random encounter that's boring. So if you are a DM and you roll a random encounter and it's going to be boring, you have 2 options where you don't have to cheat. Number 1, simply narrate. So you guys have been traveling on the road for 12 days. And the king was right. The roads aren't safe. You were attacked several times by bandits and goblins. You're going to need to find the solutions to prevent these attacks on the roads. That's all you need. I mean, the 5th level PCs don't need to fight the 3 goblins to know they can beat them. Just knowing they had to fight the 3 goblins moves the story forward. The other option is make it interesting. Maybe there's something besides the challenge of the fight to make that combat interesting. Maybe one of the goblins screams out one of the player's relatives' names. How does he know that? Come up with something. You can make it so that it's not just about do the PCs win or lose the fight, but what kind of interesting things might happen during the fight to make it worth playing through. If you can't think of anything, then don't do it. I've been playing in a campaign where one of the PCs has lost a memory and nothing really happened with it. But if you roll a random encounter and it's not going to be interesting, then maybe toss in a clue. Maybe you have one of the NPCs recognize that PC. It's you, John, and then attack him. And then after the combat's over, they have that clue and their story has moved forward. So there are ways to make these combats interesting. If you can't come up with anything, then don't run the combat. That doesn't mean you have to pretend you rolled something else. So what about encounters that are too tough? Well, the first thing I should say is you shouldn't have an encounter on a random encounter table you're not prepared to run. If it's on there, you should be prepared to run it. And if you don't want to run it, get it off the table. So that's easy and it can be done beforehand. However, if you roll an encounter that's going to be tough, and maybe the characters have been weakened a little bit, and so this is going to be tougher than you ever expected it to be, then you are the one, you're the DM. You can set it up. Maybe the players have lots of rocky terrain they can use for defense. Maybe they come across the enemy and they're in a position to ambush. Or maybe you give them a chance to sneak around. Maybe it's difficult and it requires some planning and maneuvering. But there's a lot of different ways you can play that. PCs don't always have to win every fight either. It can be okay to avoid a fight or escape from a fight. You as a DM can facilitate that in your setup. Random encounters don't tell you every single thing about the encounter. That's up to you. So you make it up in a way that serves the purpose of creating an encounter the players know is going to be a problem. And then they can deal with it appropriately, either with some kind of tactical advantage they have, or avoiding it, or getting away. And again, That's way more exciting because that random encounter that's super challenging, they know now it can happen. And when it happens, they have to deal with it. So what about that random treasure roll? Well, here's my suggestion there. If you're rolling any kind of powerful treasure, any kind of treasure that's going to be really meaningful to the players, don't roll. Pick. Pick something. Pick something that's cool for somebody. And you can do this beforehand. In most cases, you shouldn't even have to roll random treasure. You should have all your treasure already picked out, and then you just determine what the characters get. And skip the roll altogether. You don't need to fake a roll. So that way, you never have a situation where something comes up that the players shouldn't have. And so the minor items, it doesn't matter if they're not interesting. But the big items, you've already set them up. They're going to be interesting. They're going to show up at the right moments. Treasure does not have to be random. DMs are allowed to pick it, so just pick it. Don't go through the whole show of pretending to roll and then pretending to roll something advantageous to the characters. It's okay for them to know that you picked treasure that was going to be appropriate for the story. Now, what about if an encounter's too easy? Because either the players are rolling well or you misjudge them. Well, generally speaking, when it comes to the first encounter of the night, I want it to be easy. The first encounter I run against the players will tend to be easy. And the reason for this is it's a good way to gauge where the characters are. And so then you know, you can kind of adjust in your head for following encounters. They're walking through everything. Maybe there's going to be 4 goblins, not 3. But generally speaking, if players are getting lucky and they're using good tactics, they should receive the reward from that. And the reward from that is they had an easy encounter. So just let them have it. And then the next encounter, maybe it's a little tougher. Now, if all the encounters are too easy, then up them, right? Rather than faking die rolls, throw an extra enemy in. Because as a DM, you set the encounter. So setting the encounter doesn't need random rolls. I don't roll random rolls to determine how many orcs are going to be in the room. I've picked how many. And if I want to change that number, I can. But what I'm not going to do is run the encounter as I originally wrote it and then pretend that they rolled better than they actually did. Instead, just reset the encounter so it's the appropriate challenge. So what about when the players are not doing well? So as a DM, again, we can adjust encounters to make them easier if they're finding it overly challenging. But sometimes you just end up in one encounter and it just suddenly turns against the players and you didn't know it was going to be so tough. And now you're looking at PCs potentially dying. There's a couple things we can do as a DM as precautions for when this situation occurs. The first is, if you know a challenge is going to be tough for players, you need to think about what their other options are. What are they going to do if things turn against them? One of the best things you can do is create a route of escape. I mean, you can even go into the combat and have somebody roll a perception roll, and if they succeed, you might even point it out to them that, hey, you notice that if you needed to, there is a sewer grate right there, and you might be able to slip in there pretty easily, and you don't think they're small enough to follow you. But you don't have to do that. You don't have to have a die roll at all. If it's something you want the players to know about, you can just describe it in the terrain. So there's these enemies, and there's these buildings, and there's these rocks over here, and there's this sewer grate over there, and it's about 5 foot wide. And then, if things turn against the players, then they got to start thinking, what are we going to do? We might lose this. And then you might even remind them, well, there was that sewer grate. And then they get to think, oh, wait, are they big enough to get through that sewer grate? They're not? Hey guys, can we disengage and get away? I like to let players know at the beginning of a campaign that this is the way I play. What you see is what you get. I'm going to roll in front of you. Sometimes the enemies are going to crit hit you. Sometimes they're going to crit hit you when it's inconvenient for you. And that might be bad for you. Now, on the other hand, I don't down a player that's already gone down. And there's a couple ways to look at this. I mean, now you might say, but it makes all the sense in the world. This enemy has 3 attacks around and they drop me on the first attack. They can't reach anybody else, so why don't they just finish me off? Well, I would argue, do they know you need finished off? When's the last time as a DM I had a dragon go down and the PCs say, well, we keep attacking it to make sure it's dead? No, they usually stop because that's the end of the combat. That's the way it is for all NPCs. How would they know that a PC works differently? Maybe if you heal them and they get back up, now that might be an indicator. And you might even have them make an insight check to see if The narrowing of the eyes of the enemy suggests to them that now they know they need to finish you off. Creates that additional danger, creates that additional risk. Players at my table know they're in trouble, and they might want to think about being defensive or even about running away. And it's important that when you have encounters like that, that running away is an option and it's not the end of the campaign. They got to be able to have another way to get to where they need to go, or another chance to go at these enemies. Maybe they retreat, rest, come back and take them on again. Maybe they don't have to take them on again at all. Or maybe they can go and get reinforcements. There's got to be options there for them. And by doing that, the risk is real. I've had players be foolhardy in campaigns and their characters just die because they're foolhardy. They ran ahead of the rest of the group. They got surrounded. They got taken down. No one could save them. They failed their death saves. Whoops, you died. But that's important. It's important to have characters die when they do that kind of thing, because if that doesn't happen, again, you kill the risk. It's okay to be foolhardy when the odds are all in your favor. But when you're foolhardy when you need to be cautious, there needs to be a consequence, because that is the challenge. They needed to be cautious. They failed to do so. There needs to be a consequence. And then the next challenge, they know, and it becomes a little scarier. It becomes a little more tense. It becomes a little more fun. But if all else fails, rather than fudge a die roll, just fall back to the old trope, the Deus Ex Machina. Yeah, it's tired, but it happens in fantasy all the time. It happens in great fiction all the time. It's okay, but set it up beforehand. It shouldn't be something out of nowhere. It should be a case where maybe the players knew that the eagles were in the area, or maybe they have a way to signal for some help. You can set this into the story. It might even be something with a consequence, like maybe one of the players can call in help, but then they want something in return, and it creates a new challenge for the players. So there's ways to work it in a way that it's not just free help. You can mix it into the story. It can make for a better story. So I don't think that's poison. Rolling the die roll and pretending it's something it isn't, that's poison. So 5 basic tips to avoid having to fudge a die roll. Number 1, make the first encounter easier. That is going to give you a way to gauge how the characters are doing and engage the rest of your encounters to ensure they're appropriate for how the characters are doing that session. Because you have situations where this player isn't going to make it this week. So how does that affect how effective the group is? You don't know. So make it easy and you can find out. Number 2, provide opportunities for escape. If an encounter is going to be tough, just make it clear where the avenues of escape are. And then if things turn against the players, they at least have that option. Number 3, failure should be an option. Running away is a type of failure. Dying is a type of failure. But sometimes failure isn't the end. Sometimes failure is just things got a little bit harder. Then the risks are real, it's just the stakes aren't too high. And players will see that they fail sometimes. And when they fail sometimes, the successes mean more. Number 4, don't finish off the dying players. If a player goes down, let them make their rolls. Let characters stabilize them. Unless the characters do something to indicate that that person is still alive, the enemy's probably going to assume they're dead. If you make that as the assumption, a lot less characters are going to die in combat. And finally, number 5, if all else fails, Deus Ex Machina. It's kind of a last resort, but you can build it into the story so it's not so hokey. And as long as the players realize it's not an unlimited resource, make it a resource, make it something they have to pay for, then they still feel the impact of that failure, even though their characters didn't die for that failure. So again, you're just reducing the stakes. By following those 5 rules, you should never, ever have to fake a die roll. And then you maintain the structure of your campaign. Roleplay, story, empowerment, and risk. And those things together are going to make for a better campaign for your players. If you are somebody who normally fakes your die rolls, I'll tell you something. Your players know. They already know. They don't tell you because they don't know the exact die roll that you faked, but they know that you fake your rolls. And they all enjoy your campaigns less than they did before they knew. That's the situation you're in right now. And there's only one fix. The fix is get your screen out of there. Start rolling in front of them. Start announcing DCs before they roll. Follow my rules. Lower the stakes of failure. And then the players know that they can trust you, that your rolls mean something, that their rolls mean something. They know what failure means. They know what success means. They get to mix both of them. Success becomes a real triumph, something that wasn't certain. And you will find your campaigns more enriched for it. I have one final point to make. Sometimes a campaign ends in a really challenging fight. The super challenging fight. The fight that you already knew the players weren't necessarily going to win. And those are usually not the fights where you want players to run away because there's nowhere to go from there. The story's over. This is the climax. Either the bad guys win or the good guys win. Here's my recommendation to you. Either the bad guys win or the good guys win. Let the dice roll where they may. Yeah, it's a bit of a downer when you finish a campaign and you lose. You lose in the final combat. But you know what? Some of the best stories involve the hero dying at the end. It happens. Sometimes the heroes lose. And if you're going to lose, lose in an exciting, challenging fight. A fight that you could have won, and it just didn't quite go that way. That's still memorable. And the thing is the next campaign you run, the players know. And if they win that final fight, it becomes all the richer. It becomes all the better. The campaign is more memorable than anything you have run before. So that's it. That's why I don't fudge my die rolls anymore. I used to when I was young. I think we all did once upon a time because it was once considered kind of cool to be a DM. It felt powerful to be able to just change your die rolls when you wanted to. But I think you're doing your players a disservice. And you might not even realize it. You think you're making the story better. You think you're making the game more fun for everyone. You're not. You're making it less fun for everyone. That's why it tends to be the DMs who say it's okay if the DM fudges their die roll. So that's my opinion on it. Let me know your opinion. Are you a DM? Do you fudge your die rolls? Why? Did I change your mind? Or did I not? And why not? Let me know in the comments down below. And in the meantime, I'm going to sit back and relax. And I'm going to have some fun. Because D&D's for everyone. Thanks, guys, and I'll see you next time.